The parking lot in question had been a commercial vehicle depot until someone with an angle grinder and a sense of historical destiny cut through the perimeter fence and decided that the cracked concrete apron between two rows of rusted shipping containers made an excellent launching pad from which to project regional power into the Red Sea. This is not a metaphor. The Houthi movement's missile and drone forces have operated from parking lots, from shallow scrapes in rocky hillsides, from converted livestock shelters, and from positions that professional military planners would look at and describe, with genuine admiration for the audacity, as unconventional. The launch commander, standing between the containers at 1:47 local time on a Wednesday, had a map, a radio on an Iranian-provided encrypted frequency he believed was secure, and 12 Shahed 136 one-way engagement drones arranged in pairs along the apron's eastern edge. Their delta wings folded back against the fuselage like sleeping paper planes, each one carrying a warhead that the engineers in Tehran had designed to be adequate for the task. He also had a commercial quadcopter drone positioned 60 miles to the northwest to observe the results and confirm battle damage assessment. He had thought of everything. What he had not thought of, what the parking lot, the encrypted radio, the BDA drone, and 6 weeks of planning had not accounted for, was what was waiting for him in the southern Red Sea. Approximately 210 nautical miles northwest, USS Dwight D. Eisenhower had been on station for 11 weeks. 11 weeks is a long time at sea. Long enough for the crew's opinions about the galley's Thursday meal rotation to have calcified into something approaching formal grievance. Long enough for the coffee in the Combat Information Center to have developed a reputation as something between a stimulant and a construction material. The kind of coffee that does not pour so much as commit. Long enough for the Houthi drone provocation to have migrated from the category of serious tactical alert into the background condition of deployment. The way a highway sound becomes invisible to people who live near a highway. Present, acknowledged, factored into every watch-standing evolution, but no longer the thing that makes the night watch officer's hands shake. It was 1:52 on a Wednesday. The flight deck smelled of jet fuel, sea spray, and the particular metallic undertone of a warship that has been underway long enough that the ventilation system has opinions. A plane captain was running a pre-flight inspection on an FA-18F in the number 2 catapult position, working through his checklist with a flashlight and the focused economy of someone who has performed this specific inspection approximately 400 times and has no desire to make it 401 through carelessness. In Combat Information Center 2 decks below, the Tactical Action Officer, a surface warfare officer who had been at sea long enough to develop genuine philosophical positions on the concept of the midwatch, was annotating his deck log and considering, for the third time in 20 minutes, whether the coffee situation could be described as an operational readiness issue. On the flight deck's port sponson, a second-class petty officer was tightening a hydraulic fitting that had been flagged in the previous shift's maintenance log, headphones in, completely indifferent to the fact that this was not, technically, his job. This is the part that matters. The E-2D Hawkeye that would normally be airborne to the southwest, providing continuous early warning coverage with its APS-145 radar and extending the strike group's situational awareness by 300 miles, was sitting on the Air deck, undergoing a scheduled rotodome maintenance cycle. The replacement aircraft was 40 minutes from being ready for launch. There was, in the language of the watch brief, a seam in the overhead picture. Oh, a gap in early warning coverage to the southeast, in the general direction of the Yemeni coast. That would exist for approximately 40 more minutes before it was closed. This was known. It was logged. It was a factor in the watch officer's threat calculus. It was not considered critical, because the SPY-1 radar aboard USS Philippine Sea, sailing 8 miles ahead on standard screening station, could still cover the gap at shorter range, and because the probability of a coordinated Houthi launch happening in precisely the 40-minute window of reduced early warning coverage was statistically low. The launch commander in the Houthi parking lot was, statistically, doing his best. At 1:53, the first Shahed 136 ignited its engine. The sound of a Shahed 136 starting is a specific acoustic experience that Red Sea mariners have come to know intimately over the previous 18 months. a small Iranian-built single-cylinder piston engine that produces approximately 24 horsepower and a noise that experienced operators describe as a lawnmower, crossed with an angry weed trimmer, pitched slightly higher than dignity requires. The first drone rolled 40 meters across the repurposed parking lot and lifted into the dark. Then the second. Then, in pairs and near pairs over the following 5 minutes, the remaining 10. The launch commander watched each one climb and bank toward the northwest. Running lights off, GPS waypoints locked, warheads armed. He keyed his encrypted radio and reported successful launch. He then moved to his vehicle and began the process of departing the area at a pace that suggested genuine personal motivation. He did not know the quadcopter he had positioned 60 miles northwest. His battle damage assessment platform, transmitting on a consumer-grade 5.8 GHz video link, had already been noticed at 1:57 aboard USS Philippine Sea. The SPY-1 radar, which does not search so much as simply illuminate the entire three-dimensional volume of airspace around the strike group and present it as a continuously updated tactical picture, registered 12 contacts. Not one contact that resolved into 12. 12 simultaneously, because the radar does not politely cue threats. Bearing 155, range 144 nautical miles, altitude between 300 and 500 feet, speed 115 knots, course 330. The combat system cross-referenced bearing, speed, altitude profile, and the electronic emission package already being compiled by the SLQ-32 Electronic Warfare Suite. Classification: 11 seconds. Shahed 136 variant, high confidence. The 13th contact appeared at 1:58. Smaller. Stationary relative to the main formation. Commercial quadcopter emission signature, operating on 5.8 GHz. The system flagged it automatically. The electronic warfare operator looked at it, looked at the 12 inbound contacts, looked at the bearing geometry. The quadcopter was positioned to observe the engagement area. He put a mark on it. The tactical action officer aboard Philippine Sea looked at his display. He looked at 12 inbound contacts and 1 spotting drone. He looked at the E-2D status indicator. He keyed the command circuit with the measured tone of a man reporting a weather change rather than a swarm of one-way engagement drones. Eisenhower, Philippine Sea. 12 inbound contacts, bearing 155, range 144. Shahed 136. Hostile intent assessed. +1 BDA platform, bearing 158, range 80. Request weapons free, all contacts. He did not add please. The tactical situation spoke for itself. The response from Eisenhower came in approximately 5 seconds. Philippine Sea, Eisenhower. Weapons free. Engage sequentially. CAP vectoring now. The tactical action officer acknowledged. He turned to his fire control coordinator. What he actually said was, "Let's sort these out. Now comes the 90 seconds. 144 nautical miles sounds like a comfortable buffer until you do the arithmetic. And the arithmetic is not comforting. At 115 knots, the contacts were closing the distance at approximately 1.9 miles per minute. The E-2D was still down. The CAP aircraft, 2 FA-18Cs on combat air patrol to the northwest on a different threat axis, needed 2 minutes to reverse course and 3 more to reach engagement range. The F/A-18F on the number 2 catapult needed 7 minutes from the launch order to be airborne. The SM-2 extended range missile could engage right now at current range, but with 12 contacts incoming in a loose swarm formation. The question of engagement sequencing, which contacts to engage with SM-2 versus routing the CAP, whether to dedicate full battery to the lead element or split the solution, required a decision tree that the fire control system was computing and the tactical action officer was validating simultaneously. The contacts were at 138 miles, all closing. The fire control coordinator had an engagement solution on the 4 contacts that had pulled slightly ahead of the main swarm. The lead element, the ones that would arrive first. The SM-2 guidance radar was tracking. The solution was clean, but committing 4 SM-2 rounds. At one point, $2 million each against 4 drones, worth approximately $20,000 each, is a financial equation that, while operationally straightforward, produces numbers that somebody in the Pentagon budget office will stare at with genuine personal pain. And if you did the same math on the other 8, you were looking at the better part of $10 million in response costs against roughly $240,000 in Houthi hardware. An exchange rate so unfavorable that it would look like a hostile act against the U.S. defense budget if a spreadsheet could feel emotions. The tactical action officer did not think about the spreadsheet. He had his own spreadsheet: 12 contacts, 7 minutes to cap intercept range, SM-2 rail capacity, the fuel state of the cap aircraft, the catapult shot timing, and the trajectory geometry of the contacts that were still spreading laterally in what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to complicate the engagement solution. He made the call in about 40 seconds. SM-2 on the lead 4. CAP routed for the middle cluster. The FA-18F from the catapult to cover any leakers, and CIWS as the final layer for anything that made it through. Layered defense in sequence. Textbook. The textbook had been written for exactly this situation. The catapult order went down at 1:59. The F/A-18F on the number 2 catapult was airborne at 2:04. The plane captain's flashlight still on the flight deck where he had dropped it when the general quarters alarm sounded. The CAP aircraft went supersonic at 2:01, burning fuel at a rate that gave them a precise engagement window and not much more. The fire control coordinator authorized the first SM-2 firing sequence at 0202. Those 90 seconds, from first contact to weapons-free to firing sequence, were the only moment in this story when the outcome was not completely predetermined. Everything after was execution. The SM-2 engagements against the lead 4 contacts were, in the clinical language of the after-action report, nominal. Each missile traveled at Mach 3.5 and pulled terminal guidance G-forces that the Shahed 136's airframe would have found deeply unpleasant in the microsecond available for the observation. The lead element ceased to be a coherent formation at an average range of 82 nautical miles from USS Philippine Sea. The middle cluster of 6 contacts met the CAP aircraft at approximately 60 miles. The FA-18Cs engaged with AIM-120 AMRAAMs, a missile that costs roughly $400,000 per round and travels at Mach 4, being employed against drones that cost $20,000 and travel at about the speed of a brisk bicycle commute, if that bicycle commute covered the Red Sea at night. The geometry of this engagement was so lopsided that calling it a fair fight would be like calling a freight train a fair match for a shopping trolley that happened to be on the tracks. 2 contacts survived the initial engagement sequence. One had descended to below 50 feet, wave skimming, a valid low-altitude penetration technique in principle, and had used the radar shadow of the surface clutter to complicate the AIM-120 guidance. The other had separated from the main formation during the engagement, taking a slightly different approach angle in what the post-incident analysis would describe as a rudimentary evasion maneuver, and everyone else would describe as lucky timing, that happened to put it in a seam between engagement zones for approximately 40 seconds. These 2 contacts continued toward the strike group at 115 knots. The CIWS operators aboard USS Laboon, which was sailing on the strike group's southeastern screen, had been tracking them since the engagement began. The Phalanx CIWS, a system that fires 20mm tungsten penetrators at a rate of 4,500 rounds per minute, and tracks its targets with its own fire control radar, requiring no human input once activated. Engage the first contact at 0217 and the second at 0219. Both contacts were rendered inoperable. The closest approach to any strike group asset was 3.2 nautical miles. The flight deck resumed normal operations at 2:31. The tactical action officer filed his coffee cup, found it empty, and filed the initial contact report. Now stop, because the intelligence picture from this engagement deserves its own chapter. And this channel is the only place you will hear about it in this level of detail. From the moment the first Shahed 136 appeared on scope, the SLQ-32 electronic warfare suites distributed across the strike group had been in full passive collection mode. The Shahed 136 is not a sophisticated emitter, but it is not silent. Its GPS receiver module broadcasts a weak signal on L-band as it interrogates the satellite constellation, and the specific timing signature of that interrogation, a pattern created by the firmware version of the navigation module Iranian engineers had sourced for this production batch, had been fingerprinted by American EW operators across dozens of previous encounters. The SLQ-32 recognized the signature in approximately 8 seconds and matched it to a specific manufacturing lot. This sounds like a minor detail. It is not. It means the intelligence cell can track the rate at which specific drone batches are being consumed, which tells them something about Houthi production, resupply timelines, and Iranian export cadence. 12 drones from one identified production batch. Logged, analyzed, forwarded via Link 16 to the Fleet Intelligence Cell within minutes of initial detection. The communications picture was even more valuable. The encrypted radio the launch commander had used to report his successful launch was operating on a frequency that had appeared twice before in the Red Sea theater over the preceding 4 months, both times associated with Houthi command and control activity before previous provocations. The signal had now appeared a third time, from the same geographic area associated with a confirmed launch event. The intelligence cell had a probable location for the command node, a confirmed frequency, and an encryption type that cryptanalysis would spend the next 72 hours working against. The launch commander's encrypted report, the one he believed was secure, was not, in the assessment of the EW operators who logged it, going to remain secure indefinitely. The BDA quadcopter was the most instructive piece. When the SLQ-32 identified it at 1:58 and it was subsequently engaged and rendered inoperable at 2:11, the strike group's intelligence officer noted its position, its bearing relative to the launch site, its bearing relative to the expected engagement area, and the fact that it had been positioned to observe the engagement from a specific angle. That angle told him something about what the Houthi command cell considered the most likely threat axis. Which is to say, it told him something about how they expected the US to respond. What they expected is not what happened. What they expected, apparently, was a more centralized defensive geometry than the distributed layered engagement that actually occurred. The intelligence officer wrote 3 paragraphs about this in his post-incident assessment. Those 3 paragraphs are probably the most expensive content the Houthi movement funded in this entire operation. They paid for it without knowing it existed. The launch site was fixed from bearing, range, and GPS telemetry data to within 180 meters of the actual parking lot. A reconnaissance pass confirmed the location the following morning. The shipping containers were still there. The concrete had scorch marks from 12 engine starts in rapid sequence. Now, the money. Because it would be irresponsible to discuss this engagement without discussing the money. And this channel is not known for irresponsibility. 12. Shahed 136 drones at an estimated $20,000 to $50,000 per unit represents an investment of between $240,000 and $600,000, depending on whose cost model you believe. Add the commercial BDA quadcopter, the operational overhead, the Iranian advisor's time, the encrypted communications equipment, and the 6 weeks of planning. Call it $700,000 in total. This is a meaningful sum of money for an asymmetric movement operating in a wartime economy. The United States Navy spent approximately $2.4 million in SM-2 rounds, 2 rounds at $1.2 million each. 4. AIM-120. AMRAAM rounds at $400,000 each at another $1.6 million. Flight operations for 2 FA-18Cs and 1 FA-18F at roughly $25,000 per flight hour per aircraft over a 2-hour engagement window, $150,000. CIWS rounds, negligible. The repositioning of USS Philippine Sea and USS Laboon from their screening stations, operational cost absorbed into standard deployment. The KH-11 reconnaissance satellite pass over Hodeidah for post-incident imagery. Unclassified cost estimate, approximately $2 million per tasked pass. Total U.S. expenditure in direct costs, somewhere between $6.5 and $8 million. The Houthi movement spent $700,000 to compel the United States to spend $8 million. In the narrow accounting of asymmetric cost imposition, this is a rational strategy. The Houthi command cells understand it, which is why they keep launching. What they persistently fail to factor into this calculation is the qualitative outcome column, which reads, in its entirety, 0. 0 damage to strike group assets. 0 effect on carrier air-wing operations. 0 propaganda value, because the BDA platform that would have provided footage for state media was rendered inoperable at 2:11 before capturing a single frame of the engagement. 0 across every measure that actually determines whether a military operation achieved its stated objective. Somewhere in the Pentagon, a budget analyst stared at the $8 million line and developed a stress response. Somewhere in the Houthi command structure, a planner looked at the absence of any BDA footage and developed a different kind of stress response. These are both valid stress responses. They stem from different problems. On the flight deck of USS Dwight D. Eisenhower at approximately 2:33, a damage control petty officer was completing a post-general quarters walkthrough, checking for anything out of place, anything that the vibration of the catapult shot had knocked loose, anything that needed a form filled out. He found nothing. He logged the walkthrough. He found the plane captain's flashlight, which had been dropped when the GQ alarm sounded and had rolled into a catapult track. He placed it on the tool board. He went below for what remained of the midwatch meal, which had been delayed by 12 minutes due to the general quarters evolution, and now consisted of something the galley was willing to describe only as protein option 2. Which tasted significantly less like chicken than the advertised option had promised. He ate it. He had been at sea for 11 weeks. His standards had adjusted accordingly. By 4:30 local time in Sana'a, the Houthi media operation had assembled its statement. The statement described, with the gravity appropriate to a landmark military achievement, a large-scale precision operation in which the naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces had conducted a successful combined maritime engagement against the American aggressor fleet in the Red Sea. The statement claimed the drones had reached their objectives. A spokesperson appeared on the affiliated broadcast channel and explained at length that the engagement demonstrated the futility of U.S. naval presence in the region. Graphics showed drone flight paths extending across the Red Sea. The background music was, by the standards of the genre, appropriately stirring. The broadcast was well produced. The ticker at the bottom of the screen ran supporting commentary from analysts who had not been in Hodeidah and did not know what the parking lot looked like. What the broadcast did not include, BDA footage showing the drones reaching their objectives. Because the BDA platform had been rendered inoperable at 2:11 before any of the primary contacts reached engagement range, before it could transmit a single usable frame. The broadcast claim rested entirely on the fact that launches had occurred. What happened after the launches was, for the Houthi media operation, a narrative gap they filled with production values and conviction. The actual battle damage, as assessed by USS Dwight D. Eisenhower's damage control teams in the post-GQ walkthrough. 1 flashlight, displaced from its storage position, recovered and returned to its toolboard at 2:33. No reportable damage. The Tactical Action Officer's after-action report ran to 14 pages of standardized naval format. It covered detection parameters, engagement sequencing, weapons expenditure, intelligence collection results, recommended adjustments to the E-2D maintenance scheduling to avoid future coverage gaps, and an appendix on the BDA quadcopter engagement that the intelligence officer had insisted on including in full. The Tactical Action Officer had no objection to the appendix. He had objections to the reporting format, which required him to describe 12 straightforward intercepts across 14 pages when the executive summary could have been 2 sentences. He did not put this observation in the report. He had been in the Navy long enough to understand which opinions belong in written records and which belong in conversations over bad coffee. He refilled his cup. The coffee was still terrible. The Red Sea was still flat and dark outside the porthole. The E-2D was back on the flight deck, rotodome installed, 30 minutes from a launch window. The strike group's defensive picture was whole again. 11 weeks and 4 days into deployment. The calendar said 3 more weeks until the relief. Someone in the galley was already negotiating about the Thursday meal rotation. Iranian state media would pick up the Houthi broadcast by mid-morning and run it in the international segment, framing the engagement as evidence of American vulnerability in the region. They would not have the BDA footage either, because it did not exist. They would use archival footage of previous drone launches instead, which looks the same because all parking lots look the same at night. The graphics team would do their best. The ticker would run its commentary. The broadcast would reach its audience and produce in that audience whatever feeling it was designed to produce. In the strike group intelligence files, the engagement had produced something different. A confirmed production batch identifier for this drone variant, a probable command node location, an encrypted communications frequency now flagged for continued collection, and a detailed picture of how the Houthi command cell models U.S. defensive geometry, including the specific misconception that the BDA drone's positioning revealed. That misconception is logged. The next time a Houthi provocation is planned around a model of U.S. defensive behavior, the model will be wrong in a way that the U.S. intelligence cell already knows about, and the Houthi planners do not. The parking lot gave more than it took. It always does. The invoice, as usual, was never sent. Bye for now.